Are we live? I think we're live. Are we live? Yes, we're live. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, internet. It's an unscheduled live stream. Hopefully visible and audible. I see a thumbs up. Awesome. All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Hello, folks. Good morning, good morning. It's been a while since I've done one of these unscheduled live streams. So that I do one and have a Tuesday news day. Good morning, good morning. Happy Tuesday to the folks for whom it is Tuesday. I happen to be in a part of the world where it's actually Monday right now, but Monday news day doesn't really have that good rhyme. Tuesday news days sounds cooler, so that's what I'm going for. And half the world is already on a Tuesday, so it's fair. Welcome to the stream. We're going to be doing some news updates around the world, and I'm going to try and do that a little more often to catch you guys up on what's happening around the world. Good morning, good morning. Thanks for joining. I also happen to be streaming to 3 different locations. This is the first time I'm doing this. This is going to YouTube, it's going to Facebook, and it is going to Twitch. Considered doing Twitch for a long time, but never managed to do it. This is the first time I'm doing this. So welcome to everybody who's joined. Good morning. Good morning. Hopefully my audio and video is good. Please let me know where you folks are from. Good morning. Good morning. Let me know where you folks are from. I'd love to know. I think a lot of people joining at this time are from India because that's kind of like morning, and you folks are just waking up. Tuesday news day. Yes. We're going to do some quick roundup of things. It's clear. Thank you. Thank you. Again, like I said, I'm kind of streaming at 3 different locations. So I see a lot of people. Oh, I see people from Facebook. Hey, Hyderabad. Welcome. Good morning. Hello from Bangalore. Welcome. My hometown. Bangalore represent. Right. Good morning. You folks can hear me fine. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. So we can get started. So here's the idea. I have picked a bunch of stuff that I've read over the week, articles that I find interesting, or blog posts or announcements that I find interesting that I want to share with you. And we're gonna go through those articles and blog posts or whatever, and we'll learn from it. Right? We're gonna learn from it, see what are things that we can learn and grow. So, good morning to everybody who's joining in. Charlotte, Chennai, welcome. Thanks for joining. All right, let's kick this off. Tuesday news day. The biggest news that I found, and very excited about this, is the OpenAI announcement. You folks heard about this? OpenAI released a new model, which is really exciting, really cool, and All about Java? No, not all about Java. It's basically all about everything in the interwebs, right? San Jose. All right, for the San Jose person, I understand that it's not yet Tuesday, so it's Monday Newsday. But for all other practical purposes, we're going to be looking at the news. So, how many of you folks heard about this announcement? OpenAI released a new model. It's called O1 Preview. Folks have been waiting for GPT-5 for the longest time. These people didn't release GPT-5. They said we're going to release a new naming scheme. They've released O1. You folks know about this? The really cool thing about this is they use a new technique for responding to your prompts. It's actually, I think, available. There's one version of this which is available and free. We can actually try this out in this stream. So the idea is there has always been this prompting technique called chain of thought reasoning. The idea is when you ask AI to do something, right? It's like give it a puzzle. I have 3 apples on the table and I remove 1 apple. How many apples are left? I actually happen to have an apple on the table, by the way. I didn't plan that. Just a happy coincidence. So I have 3 apples on the table. I remove 1 apple. How many is left? Usually the models today do a pretty decent job of answering that question because it's simple enough. But let's say there are more complicated problems, right? So for example, what was that? There was a popular one about parents and children. Like, okay, Tom has, Tom's parents have 3 kids, okay, and a foo bar. What's the name of the 3rd kid? And the model should tell, oh, it's actually Tom, right? Or whatever name, right? So it's those kind of challenges. It sometimes fails, especially the models with lower parameters, right? The 7 billion parameter model tends to struggle with that. So the idea is you ask it to write the reasoning that it goes through, right? You basically say, write out the reasoning, write a paragraph where you're explaining the reasoning, think out loud as you think, and then come to the answer. The very fact that it's writing out its reasoning kind of nudges the model to go in the right direction. It's fascinating how it works. Basically, we think about the LLM as basically autocomplete, right? So the fact that it has some good information at the beginning makes it autocomplete it right. So it goes to the right answer better. So what these people have done is they've basically added that kind of reasoning step in the response. So that's what O1 is. And that's the reason why, since it's a kind of new technique, they haven't called it GPT-5, they haven't called it GPT 4.6 or whatever. They've created a new series, as they say, a new series of reasoning models for solving hard problems. We've developed a new series of AI models designed to spend more time thinking before they respond. It's not spending time thinking, it's actually generating text. There's no thinking time in that sense, right? The thinking time is basically influenced by the speed of the hardware. It's not that they're thinking more, it's just that it's still a language model. It's generating language, and what it's generating before is influencing what it generates later. So it's kind of generating text which forms phases in the thinking process. They can reason through complex tasks and solve harder problems than the previous models in science, coding, and math. This is O1 and O1 Mini. Strawberry. It is called the Strawberry model, and I'll get to that in a bit. It's funny. It still can't solve the strawberry problem. I think people have tried it. It still can't solve it, and there is actually a reason behind it. There is a reason why all these models struggle, and it's not a hard problem. So basically, what Sammy is referring to is there was this thing happening online. There's kind of like a meme post where people would ask LLMs, count the number of R's in the word strawberry. And a lot of LLMs couldn't do it. Okay, so let's try this out right now. I have ChatGPT open here. Let's see if it can do it. Count the number of R's in strawberry. All right. So this is a ChatGPT 4.0, and well, looks like they fixed it. It can count the number of R's, which is interesting. All right, so here are the options here. Wait, are there 3 R's? I have to count 1, 2, and 3. Yes, there are 3 R's. I feel like this is probably a special case that they might have fixed just because of the meme. Let's see, count the number of R's in raspberry. Contains 2 R's. See, I think they have put a hack just for strawberry because so many people have been asking for it. It can't count. It was not able to count raspberry. It says the word raspberry contains 2 R's. There's a reason for it, right? I'll come to the reason in a bit. But this was called the strawberry model because a lot of people said that this model was released as a response to people saying the OpenAI model is dumb. It can't count the number of R's in the word strawberry. So right now, what we've seen is it doesn't even, we don't even have to go to the new one. ChatGPT 4.0 was able to count the number of R's in strawberry. Actually, let's switch to the new model. So here are the 2 new models, by the way. There is O1 Preview and O1 Mini. O1 Preview is a more powerful model. Mini is a little faster. So let's take the most powerful model, right? The model that's supposed to be really, really good at it. And I'm going to create a new chat. We are on O1 Preview. And seems like that's the most popular question. It's count the number of R's in strawberry. I'm going to make it harder. Count the number of R's in raspberry. Let's see if this gets it right. Thinking. It contains 3 instances. So it seems to have gotten this right. So you notice what happened here. With the O1 Preview, it says thought for a couple of seconds. So there is a thinking step that happens. Thinking, again, doesn't mean it's doing some extra processing. Okay, because again, the LLM just needs enough time to process based on how much hardware you have, right? The faster the hardware, the lesser the time it takes to process. What they're talking about when they say thinking here is that it's actually generating text in between. It's basically the chain of thought reasoning that I mentioned earlier, right? You're basically telling, don't just give me the output, think through and write out your reasoning and then give me the output. So what ends up happening is that the text that the LLM generates in terms of writing out the reasoning is going to influence the LLM's answer in a better way. It makes it more accurate than if the LLM just gave an output without thinking. It's crazy. All right, so this seems like it's doing it right. Let's try out a few more things, all right? So count the number of vowels in, instances. Let's see if it can count vowels. Thinking. Piecing together vowel counts, spotting vowels. All right, the word instances contains 3 vowels, I, A, and E. Let's see if it got it right. It has I, A, and E. So it seems to be doing the right thing. This is what was missing in the previous model. I'm pretty sure that 4.0 would get this wrong. Let's see. I'm going to copy this. I don't want to change it here because guess what happens if I change it here? The message that I send is going to have this previous messages in the context. So it'll cheat. It'll see the previous responses and it'll know. So I want to create a new chat window and I will ask 4.0 the same question. And seems like it got it right too. I don't know. But anyway, This was the reason why this was created was because people saw that this was a problem, and it couldn't count the number of hours in Strawberry. So that's the reason why they introduced this model. But now it seems like it can. All right. I sense a manual intervention with the Strawberry. It might have been, but it seems like it gets it right. There might have been a step that was dedicated for this, for counting the letters and all that stuff, because it's common now. It might not be a manual intervention for Strawberry. It may be manual intervention for like a special step for count letters. Anything to do with letters, there might be one step there which is kind of printing out or doing something like that. All right, let's see. Can you try the ease and effervescence? All right, let's give it a try. I'm gonna go back to. I'm gonna create a new one. Go over here, preview. By the way, this is an expensive thing. Okay, I think let me go to the blog post here. There are limits to this thing. They have allowed. Go over here. They allow about 30. Yeah, the rate limits. The weekly rate limits is 30 messages for O1 preview. Okay, for a full week, you can only send 30 messages to O1 preview. So I'm actually sending, I already sent 2. I'm sending 1 more. So I'm making the ultimate sacrifice for you guys so that you can benefit from me. You should be so grateful. All right, so I'm going to try this. Sammy, ease in effervescence. Let's try this. Can you count the number of E in effervescence? Did I get the spelling right? Effervescence. Okay. Let's see. Woman of truth. Contains 5 instances of E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it seems like it's doing it right. So here's the thing that you can see with the new O1 models. You can expand this thing here. You see? It outlines all the steps involved. So it says, I'm mapping out the number of E characters in the word effervescence. There are not a lot of steps here, but it does do this. If you have multiple steps that are needed, like if you're asking it to do some research, it is going to list out all those steps, which is pretty neat. Sometimes you can ask questions to it, which take a long time. Sometimes it takes 10 seconds to respond, which is still fine. After days of using back to 4, because often it just gives you thought for some minutes and then stops and needs to do again. No attach option, and it still gets better suggestion for resumes in 4 version, for resumes in 4 version. I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, Ilya. You've tried 4 and it's better in 4. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. It seems like 4 does Strawberry, right? So I don't know what's going on. Maybe that might be a thing that they've plugged in directly. But basically, that's what the OpenAI O1 preview does, right? It does a reasoning step. How it works. We've trained these models to spend more time thinking through problems before they respond, much like a person would. Through training, they learn to refine their thinking process, try different strategies, and recognize their mistakes. In our test, the next model update performs similarly to PhD students on challenging benchmark tasks in physics, chemistry, and biology. We also found that it excels in math and coding. In a qualifying exam for the International Mathematics Olympiad, IMO, GPT-4o correctly solved only 13% of the problems, while the reasoning model scored 83%. That's crazy. That's amazing. Their coding abilities were evaluated in contests and reached 89th percentile in Code Forces competitions. I don't know what Code Forces is. They have a technical report that I'm not going to go into. As an early model, it doesn't yet have many of the features that make ChatGPT useful, like browsing the web for information and uploading files and images. For many common cases, GPT-4o will be more capable. in the near term. But for complex reasoning tasks, it's a significant advancement and represents a new level of AI capability. Okay, and given this, we are resetting the counter back to 1 and naming the series OpenAI O1. Sometimes I feel like GPT-5 has gotten so much expectation associated with it that they would be scared of releasing something called GPT-5 because they feel like it may not meet the expectations. It's like the release of Half-Life 3, you know. I'm not saying that GPT-5 will never be released. That's a bad comparison to make. But I don't know if you folks know about the Half-Life game. So there was Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2. Half-Life 3 had its expectations set so high that it never happened. Okay, it's there's all these memes about when Half-Life 3 is going to get released. It never happened. So hopefully there will be a GPT-5. It'll not go down the route of Half-Life 3, but the expectations are pretty high at this point. There's some amount for safe. There's some talk about safety and preventing people from trying to bypass using jailbreaking. So it seems like O1 preview scored high even in jailbreaks as well. What is far particularly useful if you're tackling complex problems in science, coding, math, and similar fields. O1 can be used by healthcare researchers to annotate cell sequencing data. That goes over my head. By physicists for generating complicated mathematical formula needed for quantum optics. Also goes over my head. By developers in all fields to build and execute multi-step workflows. This I understand. Okay, so for multi-step workflows, you have I feel like you have these, for the longest time, we've been using agentic systems. I don't know if you folks know what agentic systems is. You basically, when you need the LLM to do A, B, and C, you don't tell it, hey, LLM, do A, B, and C. You need to tell it, hey, do A, let it do A, then get it to do B, and let it do B, and then get it to do C. You can't ask it to do multiple steps at the same time. So I guess it can do multiple steps now. Well, anyway, so that's O1 preview. There's O1 mini, which is smaller. The O1 series excels at accurately generating and debugging complex code. To offer a more efficient solution for developers, we're also releasing OpenAI O1 mini, a faster, cheaper reasoning model that's particularly effective at coding. A small model, O1 mini, is 80% cheaper than O1 preview, making it a powerful, cost-effective model for applications that require reasoning, but not broad world knowledge. Okay, so it can do reasoning, but it doesn't have knowledge, which is fine for coding. If you just want to do coding, reasoning is really what you need. So that might work. Okay, this is an early preview for the reasoning models in ChatGPT in the API. We expect to add browsing, uploads, and all those features. Cool. Nice. I want to see the coding video, but before we get there, one last thing about manual intervention is that Ford didn't get it right for Raspberry, but got it right for Strawberry. So it doesn't even seem like a change in logic. Yes. So maybe it looks like they've just hard-coded the Strawberry thing, and it doesn't know to count, but O1 can actually count, and that's the reason why it was able to pass subsequent other challenges that we threw at it, right? Just saying, aside from Raspberry new version, need a lot of work, too slow, and hence there's an alternative O1 mini and working on, while resumes found answers not as good as 4 yet. Okay. I haven't tried it out extensively, so I'm curious to see how it works, especially with coding. I'm curious to see how it works, because in my experience, Claude had slightly better performance with coding than GPT. I don't know if you folks have tried the Claude API. There was a Claude Sonnet 3.5, which works slightly better than GPT. So I don't know how O1 would compare. That would be an interesting thing to check. Let's take a look at this.
I want to show an example of a coding prompt that O1 Preview is able to do, but previous models might struggle with. And the coding prompt is to write the code for a very simple video game called Squirrel Finder. And the reason O1 Preview is better at doing prompts like this is when it wants to write a piece of code, it thinks before giving the final answer. So it can use the thinking process to plan out the structure of the code, make sure it fits the constraints. So let's try paste.
So again, I want to clarify here. When he says it thinks, it doesn't basically construct the whole thing in memory. What it does is actually writes it out. It outputs. Imagine if you were to ask the prompt, output the structure, like what would you do? Write out all the steps, right? So it writes out all the steps. And then you say, okay, now execute on this. That's basically what he's talking about with thinking. However, with O1, it doesn't show the steps. Okay. Yeah, it's literally the chain of thought process, right? It doesn't show the steps, it hides it. And then you only get the output. But it kind of takes care of this prompting for you so you don't have to do it. There's also some rumors that, and again, read it online, some people feel that it uses different levels of models for these things. So, for example, for a planning step, it might use a low parameter model to just write the plan, and then it uses a higher parameter model for actually executing on that plan. So that is possible as well. But basically, remember that when he's talking about thinking, it's basically outputting the text, but it's just that you don't see the text. In a way, it's similar to how we think. Like, for example, you're given a problem and you have to think. What you do is you actually formulate the thought in your mind. You don't say it out, but you formulate the thought in your mind. So the LLM equivalent for that would be to just write out the output, but don't actually show it to the user. So what do we have here? It's a Py game. Of course, anybody working on AI has to use Python to make a game called Squirrel Finder. You're a koala icon that can move quickly using... Oh, wait a minute. You cannot see the screen clearly. Does anybody else have this problem? Is this a global problem? Can you folks see the screen clearly or no? Anybody else? Please let me know. I want to make sure you can see this properly. Anybody? Anybody? I also urge you to check the resolution at which you're streaming. If you've just joined the stream, it might take some time for it to catch up. Or if you're watching for a while, make sure that you've chosen the best resolution that your bandwidth can afford. I think I'm streaming at 1440p, so the text should be clear. Give it a try. All right, cool. Thank you.
Overview of the prompt. The game Squirrel Finder basically has a koala that you can move using the arrow keys. Strawberries spawn every second and they bounce around, and you want to avoid the strawberries. After 3 seconds, a squirrel icon comes up, and you want to find the squirrel to win. And there are a few other instructions like putting OpenAI in the game screen and displaying instructions before the game starts, etc. So first you can see that...
Damn, it started for 21 seconds. That's insane. Considering the speed at which the GPT-4 models generate, you can imagine how much text it's output. These 21 seconds is basically it outputting all the text. So like, I'm guessing each one of these is a prompt. Maybe there is a prompt which says, describe the game in your words. And then it's basically describe the game. And then it says, gather details about the game. So all these are probably, I'm guessing, I don't know the internals of this actually. I'm guessing all of these are individual prompts that give it the chain of reasoning. And once it has all these things, it says, okay, now go craft the game. And now since all of this information is in the context, it can do a better job of crafting the game than if it just directly went to craft the game without all this context, right?
Model thought for 21 seconds before giving the final answer. And you can see that during its thinking process, it is gathering details on the game's layout, mapping out the instructions, setting up the screen, etc. And so here's the code that it gave, and I will paste it into a window, and we'll see if it works. So you see there's instructions, and let's try to play the game. Oh, the squirrel came very quickly. but oops, this time I was hit by a strawberry. Let's try again.
It actually works.
You can see that the strawberries are appearing, and let's see if I can win by finding the squirrel. Looks like I won.
Cool. So it actually made a working game. What would the GPT-4 model have done? Would it have created the working game? I don't know. But the fact that they have shown this as an example of what 4.0 can do means that it probably couldn't have. Anyway, this is cool. This is chain of thought reasoning, but without you having to do all the intermediate prompting. This is O1. The question here. What's the time period to learn AI for Java background people? For AI dev, Java, or Python? Which one is more popular / better? I have addressed this question earlier as well, Shiva. The thing to remember is there are two ways in which you can think about, okay, using AI and learning AI, right? The first is basically being a data scientist, being an AI scientist, and actually being a part of AI research and doing all that kind of work, right? Hardcore AI stuff. The second is using AI as a consumer of AI and building applications around it. If you're doing the first, then it's an entirely different stream. It's almost like you're starting from the scratch. There is a whole lot of math and science involved. And of course, for that, you would probably choose Python. For the second part, where you are an application developer and you're using AI as an additional dimension to your application, probably don't need a lot of time. You can get started very quickly. For example, OpenAI has an API. You can make a call to OpenAI, send it prompts, and have it return a response. So you can integrate it into your application in all kinds of creative ways. For that, you don't need to know Python. You don't need to know any extra AI skills. You have all the skills you need. If you can make an API call in Java as a Java developer, you're good to go. I'm going to plug my video for a Code With Me series where I build a Spring Boot application that is AI powered. I don't do a single line of Python. I don't have a single deep AI concept besides you give it a prompt, it returns a response. You should check it out, right? You build a Tinder clone using AI entirely in Java, all right? So that should give you an idea about what's the time period necessary. You don't need a lot of time. All right, cool. Moving on, what's next? It's an early preview. They're going to add more features there. And we played around with this to see how it is. Turns out AI can count the number of hours in Strawberry. I want to get into a little bit about why it wasn't able to count, right? For some time before this thing happened, why was it not able to count? Here's an article that I encountered. I fixed the Strawberry problem because OpenAI couldn't. This is already outdated because now OpenAI can solve the Strawberry problem, but basically it gets into the details of what this problem was and why it kind of started. All right. Here is the tweet that is very tongue-in-cheek about the technology is the future. Oops. I didn't mean to go to Twitter. I'm excited to reveal the incredible power of OpenAI's new Strawberry model known as O1. Oh, why do I keep clicking? How many hours in the word strawberry? The word strawberry contains 2 hours. This is the most advanced AI of today, and it cannot count the number of letters in a word. You might be thinking, what's going on? Why can it not do this? I can ask it a deep philosophical question. I can ask it a very high-tech scientific question, and it can answer that for me, but it cannot count the number of letters in a word. Why? The reason for that is, I'm going to skip through this stuff. The reason for that is this. Well, here's the question. If large language models are so smart and stuff, why can't they count the letters in a word? Here's the thing. As humans, we understand words as a sequence of letters that are then turned into syllables and then understood as words. Let's take the word strawberry as an example. Here's all the letters of the word separated out. Here are the letters. We know what strawberry spells out to. From here, it's easy for us to see that there are 3 R's in the word strawberry. Large language models don't see strawberry like this. They see it like this. You know what's going on here? Large language models see tokens. They don't actually see the letters itself. They basically split it into words. I think they cover it here. See, it's a bit worse. Models don't see human readable text. I just put it like that so you could visualize it better. Models just see token ID numbers. Here's what happens. Large language models are, as they say, glorified autocompletes, okay? They are suggesting the next word based on what is the most probable next word to follow. How do they know what's the most probable next word to follow? They do what is called distance, vector distance from the current word to identify it, right? So, for example, I'm going to give you 2 words. I'm going to give you 3 words, right? I'm going to give you cat, I'm going to give you lion, and I'm going to give you train. Okay? If I were to say which of these 3 are closely related to each other, you know what the answer is. It's cat and lion. Train is probably a little further apart. Cat and lion are related because both of them are in the cat family. We know this because we associate these things at different levels. We know that, okay, they're both animals, they're both in a single, family of cats. Train is non-living, it's not an animal, we make all those reasonings. The way LLM reasons this association, okay, these 2 are related, this is not related, is through embeddings, okay? So what it does is it basically creates it has this multi-dimensional space where it plots individual things, okay? It plots a cat as a certain place in this multi-dimensional space. It plots lion and it plots the train. And the way these dimensions are organized, just the way you're plotting it means that cat and lion are going to be closer to each other than train. Train is going to be a little further apart. So it's not saying, okay, cat and lion are related. What it's doing is it's converting cat to tokens and numbers. It's converting lion to numbers. And those numbers, those vectors, are closer to each other in this multidimensional space. And that's the reason why cat and lion are more closely associated. And train, which is another number in this multidimensional space, is a little further away because it's got properties which are a little different. So train is a little further away. So LLM knows that cat and lion are together. Now, if you were to ask, what are the letters in the word cat, it would know because it's basically looking at the numbers. This is the reason why the original LLM had a problem counting the words. It wasn't counting, it didn't even know that we were asking it to count the letters of a word strawberry. When you sent it strawberry in the prompt, what it got was this. It was a bunch of tokens, a bunch of numbers. Okay? Imagine if all of the ways that you saw every word were broken up like this, but without actually knowing what any of those parts meant. Combine that with the inability to do basic math, you're pretty much screwed. Of course, models can't understand how many R's are there in the word strawberry. It's frankly incredible that there are use cases where they shine in general. So there are ways in which you can get the model to do this. One thing, and this is what he's talking about here, solving strawberry. How do we solve strawberry? I'm not saying that O1 is doing this, but they could be. What if I just ask the model to translate the problem to Python? What if you say, hey, OpenAI, write Python code to count the number of letters in a word, and then just invoke it yourself. then it can basically take that and pass the prompt to the code that it's written. Again, the code that it's written is basically it's split out tokens, and that token is what gets executed. Like there is an execution environment where it executes the code that it generated, and it can work. So here's what he's done, right? There is this thing called code interpreter, which basically is that execution environment for Python. So it says how many R's are in Strawberry. It calls code interpreter, and here is the Python code that it's written, right? It has a variable called word. It says, okay, it's the word strawberry. It's doing word.count, and then it's printing. There you go, right? This is a technique called code flexion, right? It's not reflection, it's code flexion. It's basically reflection using the code. I don't know if there is I don't know if it's a legitimate name, but this is this one way in which you can have the LLM solve this kind of problem, because otherwise it's just looking at tokens. It wouldn't know what to do. Okay, so this is a strawberry problem, right? And this is the reason why this was called codenamed Strawberry, the model, but I don't think it's officially called that. It was supposed to be the Strawberry model. And again, when it was released, it was unable to do it, but over time, it's learned to do it. I'm guessing one of the steps that they've added is to check for this kind of problems. It's pretty cool. All right, moving on. The next article I want to share with you is this something that I found here. As Java developers, we work with a lot of legacy code, don't we? A lot of old code written in Java, not like the cool kids who write Python who always deal with new code, right? Even though Python is older than Java. So anyway, this is an interesting article that says the most important tool for working with legacy code is empathy. Every software developer who has spent more than a few weeks on a project has at least one experience in common. You find yourself reading through a file, scratching your head, trying to figure out what the author was thinking. This usually happens in legacy code where you're reading code that was written many, many years ago by some developer who's no longer working in the company. When you finally get to that aha moment, it can come with feelings ranging from confusion and frustration to awe and respect and so on. Have you folks had this? How many folks deal with legacy code? Let me know in the chat. I'm curious. However, there's one skill I try to practice in these situations: empathy. This is especially true when working with legacy code. There are already guides for how to practically walk through and understand legacy code or add automated testing. I haven't seen those guides. It'd be interesting to read. I thought I'd discuss what I keep in mind when working with legacy applications and how they help me understand why these projects are the way they are and empathize with the author. The thing is, when I was new in the industry, all right, I used to make this mistake. I used to feel like I could do better. Okay, I would look at code that was written ages ago, and I mean, like, okay, if only we could just scrap this all away and start from the scratch, it would be so much better. We wouldn't have to deal with all that mess, right? We have a clean start. We know now what we need. So those idiots wrote bad code. Let's not make that same mistake again. Let's write good code this time, right? But what I've realized is that even code written with the best of intentions become bad over time, right? It's basically any code that endures a few changes, a few developers coming and making some small changes and going away, a few projects that are delayed because of some external pressure and the poor developer has to rush through the code, do what it takes to get things done, make trade-offs and all that stuff. And those trade-offs, those things that they give up, stay in the code longer. And, a developer comes over like me and then judges them harshly. It's like, no, that's not That's not the way it is, right? The reality is that whatever you do ideally in a fresh, clean slate environment is not going to sustain, right? Real world is a little more complex. You're going to end up with problems. So I guess that's what empathy is. Kind of empathize from their point of view and say, well, this is not quite ideal, but understand. Software developers are smart. I don't know if I agree with this statement. Some are smart, not all are smart. There have been times when I wasn't very smart. So I guess it depends. ChatGPT pretty good at describing some of the code. Plugged in random lead code solutions and asked to convert it to say Python to Java and explain. I think ChatGPT is very good at lead code because there are so much of training data out there, right? A lot of code that it probably trained on is perhaps lead code. So you never know. That might be the reason why. I wonder how it does for some obscure problems which don't exist in the real world. It might still figure it out, but it may not have as strong of a training data set. First, it's best to operate under the assumption that the code's author was at least as smart and competent as you are. But that doesn't mean that they're smart. That assumes that I'm smart to begin with. This one should go without saying, but it's the bare minimum requirement for the rest of these practices. If you have worked alongside other developers and studied computer science, you should be well aware that this industry is saturated with brilliant people. I don't think I entirely agree with this assessment. There are a lot of brilliant people, yes, but then there are a lot of people who have no idea what they're doing as well. I've met both kinds. So you cannot automatically assume that they're smart, but you can assume that they had good intentions. I think that's a fair thing to assume. They weren't intentionally trying to break anything. They had good intentions. They worked with the best of their abilities. It's also safe to assume that there were challenges that they were trying to overcome. So I think that kind of empathy I can have, assuming they're smart and everything that they did was the right decision, is probably not always accurate. To take a project from idea to implementation alone is no small feat. Navigating an ever-changing landscape of technologies and system architectures, balancing stakeholder priorities, and getting a working product out the door can be a monumental task, which is fair. The original developers managed that and built something that has survived for 5 or even 10 years. So I think it's safe to assume that they at least had some idea of what they were doing. Okay. They may not have an idea of what they were doing, but people over time have made it work. So again, not to assume that they were absolutely right and spot on, but it was a team effort. It's still working. It brings me to the next thing I try to keep in mind, that this code is still live in production is a testament to how well it's doing its job. At the end of the day, we are not writing code to publish and admire for its beauty. We are trying to solve a problem. Any developer would be proud of building a project that could stand the test of time, especially in an industry as fluid as this one. Yes, that is true. You write code so that it runs in production, but you also write code so that it can be managed, maintained, and it can continue to run in production. If what you have written is basically patchwork and duct tape, and it's somehow working in production, but don't touch it, if you make any change, it'll break, I don't think that's quite what a developer should be doing. Your goal isn't to have something that runs in production. Your goal is to have something that can be maintained, can be read and understood, and can be enhanced so that it can continue to work in production. So yes, it's good that it's still working, but it's not the be all and end all of what software should be, all right? You weren't there. It brings me to what I think is the most important thing I need to remind myself when working on legacy application. Whoever worked on this in the past made the best decision they could with the information they had at the time. This I agree with. Yes, They might have made the best decision with the best of intentions. Doesn't mean that it's still the best decision and the best of intentions, right? Well, intention is still right. Still may not be the best decision now, but that's the that's the empathy that I agree with. They did what they could at the time, even though it may not be right at this time. This is true for a lot of legacy code. A lot of bad decisions, we look at code and go like, why did it do this? Well, at the time, it was the right decision. So that's the empathy that I definitely agree with, and that's what we should have when we are looking at code. When working on a project, we're often faced with decisions that we have no right answers. We have to make a decision based on what might happen in the future. Maybe it's the direction that the business will shift, or the availability of talented developers in a tech stack. Or it could even relate it to the expected lifetime of a third-party package we are going to use. It could even be the lifetime of the tech stack, right? You might go like, okay, you choose the latest technology right now, and 5 years down the line, they're going to be like, oh, why did you use this? This happens quite a lot. So even now, I see people write to me and say, hey, can you make struts 2 tutorials, right? The last struts 2 tutorial I made was, I think, 9 years ago, 8 years ago. It was a very long time back, okay? And people still watch it. People are still using struts 2 today. And guess what? When they chose it, that was an awesome decision, right? When Struts 2 was just being released, people were like, Struts 1 is bad, man. Don't use it. Use Struts 2. It's the new shiny thing. This is going to solve all of the problems. And when it was released, it did solve all the problems that Struts 1 had, right? I don't even remember what Struts 2 does now, but those tutorials are there and people still watch it. And this is an indication that it is being used. It is actively being used. So I realized that there is a little bit of thing that is getting cut off over here. So my point is, decisions that were made at the time were right at the time. So I guess that's what is the key to empathy here. Tech stacks get outdated. You might choose the best tech stacks right now, and soon someone else is going to come and go like, wow, who's this guy who chose this? It's bad. All right. It should be obvious that the best decision, they made the best decision with the information they had at the time. All right. What can we do now? So we've decided the previous developers of a project were smart and talented. No, I didn't decide that, you did, but that's fair. The code is still being used today. Yes, and the developers made the best decision they could at the time. That's the one I agree with. It's clear that whoever worked on the project shared long-term thinking, assumed they made choices for a reason, which is obvious. There can be a lot of confusing code in the code base, and you have to ask yourself why. This is also something that I agree with. Oftentimes, when we look at code and we go like, this is crazy that it exists, there's a reason behind it, and when you change it, it's only then that you know why that thing existed in the first place, because that thing is going to break. So I think it's going to be presumptuous to assume that you can do a better job by cleaning everything up and doing things from the scratch, because again, you're going to go through the same process and the same reality is going to hit your code once it gets through a certain age. So it's good to remember that. Might not agree with all of these points, but I do in general agree that this is an empathy that you need to have. That's a fair point. Right, I'm going to address a couple of comments over here. What do you recommend for a software development manager, how someone should keep balance between technical and management leadership skills? I guess it depends on where you work. There are a lot of places where a software development manager doesn't need to have any technical skills. All they do is people management. So if you work in those places, you don't really need to do anything. Just focus on the people skills. There are certain companies where it is important. especially a lot of tech first companies require the manager to do technical stuff as well, or at least be aware of technical stuff as well. This is very common where I work. I work at LinkedIn, where I've seen a lot of managers who can code really, really well. So if you work in one of those companies, I think it's just about doing some stuff so that you're familiar with things, but you don't have to get into the details. It's hard, man. It's really hard. There's a lot of learning that you need to do on the management side as well. So I think that would still be your primary bread and butter, but just kind of have that curiosity and explore the technical side of things, even though you don't actually implement it. One of the things that I usually tell people not to do is for developers, right? What I tell people not to do is I say, don't just watch videos, but actually do hands-on stuff so that you kind of get in a little bit more in depth and kind of get your feet wet and see what are the problems people face. For a manager who is dabbling with tech, I would say do just that. Just watch videos, kind of satisfy your curiosity and know what's happening. You don't actually have to write code, but kind of familiarize yourself. So the advice that I tell software developers not to do, I would probably tell you to do, right? Watch a bunch of videos, learn the tech, and understand the kind of like the lay of the land. And you don't have to go too much in depth. And again, I'm going to clarify it as only do this if you are in an environment, you are in a workplace where it is expected out of managers. A lot of places, managers aren't expected to code. So you can do it out of interest, but it's not a requirement for your job. So just keep that in mind. Struts 2 is being watched because you've explained the concept of MVC so good that such an explanation doesn't exist anywhere. Well, that's an awesome compliment. Thank you so much. I believe I used the analogy of like a restaurant waiter or something like that. Yeah, I've gotten feedback about that as well. Thank you. Thank you so much. Most managers don't code and usually need to pick one. If one wants to do manager and code, that is startups. It's most likely yes, startups require you to wear a lot of hats at the same time. So I wouldn't be surprised. And actually in startups, it works the other way as well. A senior IC, a senior individual contributor, is sometimes expected to do people management as well. So you end up wearing multiple hats at the same time. Yes, for those cases, you would need to get into coding as a manager and into management as a coder and an individual contributor. That's a fair point. All right, next. I'm going to ask you folks a question before I get into the next article. I found this to be interesting. I knew this for a while, but I had kind of removed it from my mind. And it's interesting that it's coming back into the news now. I'm going to ask you guys a question. I want the chat to answer me this. Who owns JavaScript? Who owns JavaScript? Can you folks tell me? Do you know? JavaScript. Who owns it? Ding, ding, ding. We have the right answer. Right away. Oracle. Oracle owns JavaScript. No, not Google. if it was Google, then it would have been a whole another. Yeah, I'm not going to get there. It is. Here's the thing. Implementations of JavaScript could potentially be open source, but JavaScript is owned by Oracle. How's that possible? All right, here's the thing. This is something that was recently in the news, which is fascinating. Here's a letter to Oracle from a bunch of people who are really big in the JavaScript space, right? So this is Ryan Dahl, the creator of Node.js, Brennan Eich, who is the creator of JavaScript. There are a bunch of people who are the editors of the JavaScript spec, creators of NPM, bunch of syntax.fm. I don't know what syntax.fm is. So a lot of people who are big in the JavaScript space, have written a letter to Oracle. Oracle, it's time to free JavaScript. Dear Oracle, you have long ago abandoned the JavaScript framework, and it is causing widespread unwarranted confusion and disruption. JavaScript is the world's most popular programming language, powering websites everywhere. Is it the world's most popular programming language? I thought it was Python. Maybe it's the most widely executed programming language because like every browser uses JavaScript. I don't know, whatever their definition of most popular is. Yet, few of the millions who program in it realize that JavaScript is a trademark you, Oracle, control. The disconnect is glaring. JavaScript has become a general purpose term used by countless individuals and companies independent of any Oracle product. Oracle holds on to JavaScript trademark clearly fits the legal definition of trademark abandonment. So trademark abandonment is when somebody holds on to a trademark and they don't use it. It's like you're not supposed to hold on to the trademark. You're supposed to give it away because someone else can make better use of it, right? I think they're called trademark squatters or something like that. They just hold on to the trademark and they want somebody to give them money to hand off the trademark to the other person. Okay, so I'm not saying Oracle is doing this, but Oracle holding on to JavaScript and not doing anything with it is, according to them, fits the definition of trademark abandonment. There's a previous blog post for this as well, which is from Ryan Dahl, who's the creator of Node.js. Here is the history, right? This is why Oracle owns JavaScript, by the way. In 1995, Netscape partnered with Sun Microsystems to create interactive websites. This was a time when Java was popular and they had to... This is the reason why JavaScript was called JavaScript, okay? This was a time when Java was popular and they had to create something for the web, kind of like Java applets. So they said, let's create a scripting language and we will call it something similar to Java. They called it JavaScript, okay? So because they wanted to kind of leverage the buzz that Java had in the news, okay? And because of that, and of course, there's a famous fact at this time, Brendan spent 10 days to create the first version of JavaScript, which sucked, by the way, and he continued to work on it. It's a myth that in 10 days, JavaScript was perfect. It wasn't, but it was pretty darn good. So JavaScript was created in 10 days. And it had roughly syntactic lineage from Sun's Java language. They wanted to make it similar to Java. So there's a lot of similarities there. As a result of this partnership, Sun held the trademark JavaScript. In 2009, Oracle acquired Sun Microsystems and they acquired the JavaScript trademark. Okay? Trademark has no commercial value. Other than Oracle's JavaScript extension toolkit, Oracle does not have any products that use the trademark and presumably no planned usage. I don't think Oracle is doing anything with JavaScript. They're not a part of the committee and all that stuff, right? What is Oracle's JavaScript extension toolkit? I don't even know what this is. What is this? Empowers developers by providing a modular open source toolkit based on modern JavaScript, TypeScript, CSS, and HTML. What even is this thing? I don't know. Oracle's Jet. Oh, I know what this is. So I think it's a component library. Long back I interviewed someone who mentioned this to me. They had this in their resume and I was like, what is this? It's a component library written by Oracle. Only Oracle uses this, I think. I don't think anybody uses this. It's a collection of open source JavaScript library, Preact knockout based architecture, along with a set of Oracle contributed JavaScript libraries. Make it efficient that consumer interact with Oracle products and services, especially Oracle Cloud Services. Nobody uses this, okay? So this thing is yeah, it doesn't count as JavaScript usage, which I think is the point that these guys are making. Oracle doesn't even participate in the development of any JavaScript engines like V8, JavaScript Core, or SpiderMonkey. It seems very likely. So these are the three top JavaScript engines, by the way. V8 is the JavaScript engine that powers Chrome and Edge and all those things. There are other JavaScript Core and SpiderMonkey. This is the thing that runs the JavaScript code, right? So this is different, right? Oracle doesn't own that. Oracle owns the name JavaScript, right? The trademark JavaScript. It seems very likely the JavaScript trademark infringement would be unenforceable in court due to non-use. Since they don't use it, they can't really enforce it as well. But they still hold on to it. Careful law-abiding engineers bend over backwards to avoid its use, leading to confusing terms like ECMAScript. That's the reason why ECMAScript is even a name, right? They couldn't use JavaScript as a name, so they have ECMAScript. There's no JavaScript committee. There is an ECMAScript committee. ECMAScript, by the way, horrible name. They could have called it anything. They chose the worst name and they called it ECMAScript. But anyway, that's the name for JavaScript, right? Because they can't technically use the word JavaScript. I've been using the word JavaScript. I don't know if Oracle is going to come and sue me because Oracle has the trademark. Hopefully they won't. They don't come after YouTubers. Not big enough fish for them, I guess. The best value Oracle could derive from the trademark would be from the goodwill it receives by granting it into the public domain. It's understandable why this hasn't happened yet. It would require a very forward-thinking and high-level Oracle employee to propose something so intangible. Ooh, it's a bit of a burn there. Yet, it's obviously in the right move to trade a worthless trademark for brand marketing and goodwill. Oracle, please release the JavaScript trademark. So I think that was the blog post, and it hasn't happened. And now this is like a formal letter, right? So they have trademark abandonment clause saying this is, this is the United States code declaring what a trademark abandonment is. And in the case of JavaScript, both criteria apply. So Netscape, Sun, Oracle. So that's the transition that's happened, right? Brendan created JavaScript with Netscape, went to Sun, and now Oracle has it. Use it or lose it. Oracle has abandoned JavaScript trademark through non-use. So they're basically making a case for getting the JavaScript name, right? I don't know, could they call it something else? I know ECMAScript is a very bad name, but maybe they could call it like okay, Microsoft happily offered up JScript, but no one else wanted that, all right? So nobody wants to call it JScript. So maybe call it like JS. I don't know. Maybe just come up with it's hard to come up with a different name because everybody knows JavaScript. Will be easy to kind of like have that momentum and use JavaScript. So this is a letter. The formal letter, this is, I think, fairly new. Let's see what the date is. I don't think it has a date. So they have a domain for it as well. They have javascript.tm as the domain name for this website. And yeah, I don't know what's going to happen to JavaScript. Is Oracle going to do the right thing and release JavaScript to the public? Or are they going to hold on to it and these people come up with a different name? Are we stuck with the name ECMAScript forever? I don't know. Time will tell. I'll keep you folks updated. If you guys feel like this is a good thing to do, you can sign the letter. I don't know what good it's going to do. It's not like Oracle is sitting here and counting the signatures and then at some point they're going to decide. I have no idea. But this is an interesting observation. It's an interesting development that's happened. How do you get all these updated good blogs from? What are your sources? A bunch of tweets and friends sharing things with me. One good source for you can be my live stream and my channel. Sign up, subscribe, and all the good stuff. I plan to make more of these on a more regular basis. Tuesday Newsday, my friends. Tuesday Newsday. Hopefully I'll show up next Tuesday and give you the news for what's happening next week. So subscribe, hit the bell icon, smash all buttons, and that'll be That'll be your resource. For me, it's basically looking up at Hacker News, looking at Reddit. A bunch of my friends send me things, stuff like that. All right. Do you know Netscape had backend JavaScript like Node.js? Any idea what it was called? I have no idea. I thought I thought Node.js was like the first attempt at doing JavaScript for the backend. I honestly don't know what they did. Good vibes. Yes, good vibes, my friend. What is OpenJDK and Oracle JDK? So they're basically two different implementations of JDK. I think OpenJDK is open source and Oracle JDK is Oracle supplied with a commercial license. I'm oversimplifying it, so not going to get into the details. If Oracle keeps it, then you will have to change your courses from JavaScript to ECMAScript. Well, my channel is Java Brains, not JavaScript Brains, so I'm fine for now. But again, like I said, I don't think Oracle is going to come after somebody like me. They're going to go after the big fish. I don't know if you folks remember the Google versus Oracle court case that happened for Java, and it was for Java interfaces, right? Oracle and Google were fighting over who owns the Java APIs, right? The collection APIs, and that was a mess. So yeah, Oracle will probably go after Google. I'm small fish. They're not going to come after me. Netscape Livewire. Netscape Livewire. This is interesting. I don't know about this. Netscape Livewire. Server-side JavaScript, a decade before Node.js with Netscape Livewire. Wow, I learned something new, Ilya. Thank you for sharing this. The year is 1996. JavaScript is less than a year old, making its grand debut with the release of Netscape Navigator 2.0. We are at the very beginning of what would become the first browser war. Yeah, that was Internet Explorer and Netscape Navigator. Today we're going to look at Netscape Livewire, an extension of Netscape Enterprise Server that made writing server-side JavaScript applications possible more than 10 years before it was cool. Well, when Node.js came up with server-side JavaScript, it was not cool. A lot of people laughed at it, right? People were like, server-side JavaScript, you must be crazy. But man, Livewire, I can't imagine what was the reaction that they had. How did they do it? With Node.js, it was basically the V8 engine that was running on the server side, right? How did these people do it? Netscape and Microsoft were distributing their browser free of charge. Both companies were also in the business of selling enterprise-level software to companies and institutions looking for a one-stop shop solution to their web server. Oh, I know. Okay, so this is IIS. Yes. Internet Information Services. So Microsoft had IIS at the time, which was Active Server Pages. I coded Active Server Pages back then, way back then. Okay, I have that experience. I've coded VB on Visual Basic on the server. How about that? I don't want to get into the flashback. It was crazy times. So this was Netscape Enterprise Server with Livewire application development solution. So what ASP did support JScript, Microsoft early implementation of JavaScript. It was only one of the 3 languages supported alongside VB script. And yeah, this is what I did. Visual Basic for the server. I did VB script. And Perl script. Okay. Netscape chose a different approach and went all in with server-side JavaScript, which was the centerpiece of Livewire. That was interesting. Let's take a look at the code. Oh man. Tags are screamed because everybody was very excited. I remember there was a time when we would do capitals in HTML tags, and now everybody does small. It's like, yeah, everybody was screaming. Everybody was screaming in general, right? Even SQL I think SQL people still scream, right? Use a select star from. You have to scream out SQL all caps, and HTML is all caps as well. Well, all right. So server was a tag, and inside server you would write something like JavaScript. Interesting. Very interesting. All right. Nobody bothered at the time. It was more CGIs and Perl than yeah. I can imagine. And it was I think I don't know how popular VBS script was. I was doing that at the time, and I was like, yeah, this is the future that never came. But this is interesting. Livewire, I had no idea. JavaScript on the server side before Node.js. 10 years before Node.js. Just fascinating. All right. So this is the Oracle saga, right? I'll keep you folks posted on how this goes. I'm curious too what happens. I am a little pessimistic. I don't think Oracle is going to just abandon the JavaScript trademark, but we will see. Maybe they'll surprise me. Full respect to you, man. You're the person who gave me confidence in my first job. Hibernate courses when Docker courses release. Are you asking when Docker courses are going to release? Docker courses are already released, but you got to be a member to sign up. And if you ask me why you got to be a member, that's a whole another story that I'm not going to get into right now. But Docker courses are available. You can go to my website, javabrains.io, or on the channel. It's available for channel members. You should check it out. Click the join button right now. Okay. So this is another news item, which I found fascinating. All right. Here's an interesting article. Why Scrum is stressing you out. Is Scrum stressing you out? What do you folks think about Scrum? You know, speaking of flashbacks, I have a flashback for the waterfall model, right? Any of you folks do the waterfall model today? Hopefully no one does, because it's not, I wouldn't recommend it. But it is, some people still use it. And it has some benefits, it has some drawbacks. One of the things about the waterfall model is that usually the time period is pretty long, right? Have you coded in JSP servlet JSTL? Oh, of course I have. Yes, done a lot of JSP and JSTL. Servlets, we did, like I was working on a legacy code base. So legacy at the time, right? When JSTLs were being used, I was working on legacy code base where servlets were used as kind of like a hack. You know, speaking of legacy, we did an article on legacy code bases. Somebody had decided to use servlets in between JSTLs. Maybe they were running out of time or whatever. Now I know to have empathy. Thanks to that article. They made the right decision at the time, I guess. And yes, they were servlets. I maintained that code and I coded in JSTL and servlets as well. Good times. Nobody does that today, but we did at the time. All right. So one of the things about the waterfall model is that there is kind of like a steady pace for a long period of time before it ramps up close to the release date, right? As you get close to release, you go like, oh, this huge pressure. We got to deliver. We're going to, late nights and staying up. There have been a lot of late nights where I've kind of like stayed all night at office and gotten something done. Things show up at the last minute. There are bugs that you need to be fixed. A lot of panic. But the panic kind of has a crescendo, right? It goes at the very end. There's a lot of panic, but then for the most part, it's steady. You have a plan, you execute on the plan. It's a longer term plan, right? The problem with the waterfall model is that you don't see issues up until the very end, right? The late nights happen for a reason because, there are problems. Those bugs were there in the code for a long period of time, but you don't see it until you actually get close to the release or the deployment or whatever that is. With Scrum, you get this, this is what they call a sprint, right? You get these small sprints that you got to keep going and keep going and keep going. And it's almost like you have a waterfall every week, right? The problem is that the crescendo that you have is kind of split into, in an ideal world, that rush at the very end, in the case of a waterfall, is split into smaller rush to deliver at the end of every week. But usually what ends up happening is that it's not it doesn't equally distribute. If you sum up all the, rush to deliver for a Scrum, it's going to add up to be more than the one time, rush to deliver that you would have for a waterfall. I haven't read this article though, but I found, I kind of skimmed through this and found it to be interesting. I wanted to read this with you folks online. We call this one self-organizing, so he gets a couple extra hours on the Scrum wheel. There is some truth in this. Programming today is stressful. Way more stressful than I remember in the 90s and early 2000s. Please cover Docker, which is mentioned in your shirt. I have a Docker course. I have a Docker course on my channel. You should check it out. It's not free. It's for members, but it is available. So if you want to check it out, please do. Please shine. Programming today is stressful. Way more stressful than I remember in the 90s and early 2000s when I was just starting out. Back then, things would get crazy around deadlines, but at other times, I recall feeling pretty even. This is what I'm talking about, right? As you get close to the deadline, you basically have this panic and rush to do things. These days, however, the pressure seems omnipresent. Naturally, I'm interested in doing away with this feeling of pressure for the sake of my health as well as my productivity. So I've given a fair bit of thought to why things have gotten so bad, at least for me, if not for others, in the last couple of decades. I don't think it's due to stiff competition, shifting markets, or even tight deadlines. They have always existed. But one significant change that has occurred in my daily work routine, I've been forced to start working in sprints, usually 1 to 2 weeks, instead of spending larger chunks of time on larger projects. This shift has some unfortunate consequences. Why would sprints be more stressful? Aren't they just more frequent, shorter deadlines as opposed to the occasional really big one? Doesn't this save you from having to crunch at the end of the project? This reasoning seems logical, but it overlooks some important detail in the real lived experience of today's software developers. This is how sprints are doing us wrong. Sprints never stop. See, this is the thing that I was talking about, right? With the waterfall, you start out slow and you kind of has this crescendo. It goes up to the release. When you go to the release, you panic, late nights, all that stuff, and nothing. You celebrate, right? You go on a vacation and then gradually start up. With sprints, you have smaller panics every week. Okay? Ideally, I think this is what the Scrum thing says, the Scrum and the Agile thing says. You shouldn't have this. Ideally, it should be a straight line. Okay? You shouldn't have to rush at the end of the week or at the end of 2 weeks. If you're panicking and you're not able to deliver what you were committed to deliver at the end of those 2 weeks, that means that you didn't plan right. You didn't estimate right, which is fair. But the reality is, nobody does software estimates right. You just cannot estimate right because estimation is basically guesswork. Here's the thing you should know about me, okay? There's nothing that you should know about me, but I would like to share about me. I'm very, very bad at estimating. I'm horrible at estimating, right? Throughout my career, when a manager has come to me and asked, Kaushik, estimate this for me, I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I cannot guess. I basically have to guess, right? Estimation is all about guessing. The thing is, when you have like assembly line work, right? You're doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's very easy to estimate. You know exactly what you need to do. You say, okay, I've done this before. It's going to take this much time. But when you have like you're doing something for the first time, how can you even guess how much time it's going to take? You can, in the true sense of estimate, you can estimate it, but that's not how estimates are considered. Estimates are considered as you are going to do this at this time, right? That's what estimates are going to be for. It's like this is the amount of work that you're going to do, and guess what they're going to do, right? This is what most companies do. You're going to estimate what work is going to happen in the next week, and you're going to estimate what work is going to happen in the next week. So you better complete this, because guess what? There's work packed for the next week that you need to do. And if this slips, then this slips as well. So that's the reason why you kind of have this crescendo, right? You have to get this done because there's work planned and you don't want it to slip, right? When it comes to estimate, that makes two of us horrible. Well, guess what, Parth? We have company. A lot of people are bad at estimates because I firmly believe that estimates is just guesswork. You're just guessing. It's good for planning, but when you're planning, going by estimates is basically you assuming the best case scenario, in my opinion. There is a chance that estimates could be wrong in both directions. You could be estimating too much, or you could be estimating too less. And in either case, you need to plan for it. If you just estimate that it's exactly going to fit, that's the best case scenario. You need to estimate for both an overshoot and an undershoot. So I don't know how many people do it, but that's what needs to be done. 15-day sprints. Do you think companies follow Agile? Because I heard and experienced that ad hoc tasks keep coming. This is true. Well, you have to accommodate for ad hoc tasks. And this is one thing that's good about Agile, and I hate about waterfall. With a waterfall, you're gonna have you have this huge ceremony for doing anything that's different, right? You have with that waterfall, you start out with the requirements, you finalize it. Any changes, you're gonna go through this committee. People have to, have meetings and stuff, which sucks because that might have worked 10 years ago. It's not gonna work now. You need that flexibility. So Agile gets its name because of the agility part of it. You have to be agile to changes. So it's okay if new work comes in and if there is a good reason for it, which is fine. But then that means that you're going to go back here and you're going to change what you estimate, right? The problem is that that doesn't usually happen. And that's where it becomes a problem. It's people don't like it. Don't like Scrum. Kanban is much better and gives freedom to developers. Yes. So the thing with Kanban is you don't have this thing anymore, right? You basically pick up what you can, and then if you cannot, it just goes over to the next thing. So you're not packing up the next week or the next sprint with work that needs to be done, kind of assuming the happy path that you've covered everything in this thing. So yeah, I generally like Kanban as well. I think that's a better approach in general. Try to complete 60 to 70% of the work and then give estimations to my manager. Well, you're going to have to do it sooner, right? Managers never want to remove task out of the sprint at my last page. No, that's true. This is a problem because when changes happen, you don't want to do it because, again, they would have packed work over here, right? Or even the team, you as a team would have packed work over here. So you cannot say, okay, something new came in, this cannot move. So what happens? This peak goes up because you're going to have to get, a rush to get that done. Padding the estimate by 20% becomes second nature. Yes. Here's what's funny though. Padding happens at different levels. So it kind of becomes, that's the reason why estimates kind of become a farce. So usually, the manager asks for an estimate and then the manager has to report to their supervisor, right? In my experience, that's what happens. The manager pads 20%. The developer is like, okay, I know that the manager is asking and I need to cover my behind. So the developer pads estimate. So it's like 20% here and then 20% there and 20% there. And the problem is, in spite of that, we end up missing estimates so often, which means that we suck so much at estimating that even with all this extra padding, we have this, right? That tells us how bad we are at estimations in general. So it's pretty bad. I want to get back to this thing because this is an interesting idea. So you complete 60 to 70% of the work and then give estimates. Isn't that already too late? You estimate at the beginning of the sprint. So if if you need to cover 60% of the work, then you're probably covering half of the sprint already. So how does that work? I don't understand how you do this. But anyway, this is the problem with the Scrum model, right? This is what ends up happening. While waterfall causes higher spikes in stress. Oh, I hate this share code things. I'm just going to switch to the reader view. While waterfall causes higher spikes in stress, sprints impose a more constant medium level stress. The difference lies between higher short term stress and medium long term stress. While no stress is entirely comfortable, our bodies are better equipped to handle short term stress. I don't know about that. Do you folks think that's true? Are we better at handling short term stress? In fact, short term stress can be healthy and makes us stronger. Think of how going to the gym stresses your muscles for an hour or two, allowing them to build back stronger as long as you give them time to rest. Longer term stress, however, is more insidious. Prolonged stress wreaks the most havoc on the body over time. I think I agree that longer term stress is bad. I think yeah. I see what this person is, the point that this person is trying to make, because we have a stress response in our body, right? We have a stress response when we experience stress, mental or physical. Our body goes through a different, it kind of goes through a different mode. There are other things that the body prioritizes over longer term, right? For example, when they say about the animals being the hunter and the hunted, right? Let's say there is a deer in a lake drinking water, and then there's a lion coming to hunt for food, right? What happens in the deer's body at the time is it's not looking for longer like sustenance, right? It tries to kind of switch gears to more survival at the time. Okay, so at the time, probably the digestive system doesn't get enough attention from the body. Blood flows to the limbs, it tries to run faster. So it's not thinking longer term. The body kind of switches to, okay, survival. It kind of prioritizes different parts of the body. So high blood pressure is one of those things, right? Body increases blood pressure during stress because it needs to provide blood to different parts of the body in order to help the organism to run. We aren't running from lions, but it kind of triggers the same stress response. So maybe that's kind of what this person is saying, right? Longer term stress is harder to deal with. Short bursts of stress is okay. Sprints are involuntary. If a development team were to sit down and decide to deliver code every 2 weeks based on a process of their own design, one that makes sense to them and suited to their circumstance, that would be one thing. But sprints in a Scrum-like process don't work that way. Every aspect of a sprint is prescribed. Its duration, its meetings, its tasks, even the roles of its participants. You might think that choosing your own process wouldn't make much of a difference, but research tells a different story. Autonomy, the ability to direct one's own work, plays a significant role in how the work is experienced. Ideally, Scrum is supposed to be, we're running from Scrum Masters. Looks like Scrum Masters are getting extinct, right? To use the wildlife analogy, nobody is opting for Scrum Masters anymore. It used to be a thing 5 years ago, but I don't think there are a lot of Scrum Masters today. Teams are supposed to be self-organized. So we don't have a lot of Scrum Masters to run away from. We are our own Scrum Masters, which makes it even harder, right? It's worse. Try to complete 60 to 70% of development. This pattern is helpful when I don't have a complete idea on what thing I'm going to work on or what challenges are going to occur. It is fair. It makes for better estimates because you kind of know what you've done. So your estimates are always going to be accurate, but I think you're going to have to kind of like preload the work, right? You're going to have to work extra hours at the beginning so that you can take it easy later and you can get a good estimate so you know exactly what you're going to complete. It's a good strategy, but then in your case, isn't the work like this? It's basically this edge flipped, right? You start out with a peak and then it goes down, and then start out with a peak and then it goes down. It's basically the same sawtooth, but in the reverse order, right? You need to do that so that you can estimate on time. It's still, if it works, it's good. It's good. It's a good way to do it, right? There are still tons of Scrum Masters in big companies, and if you use SAFe, it gets worse. I have no idea what SAFe is. Be aware of the backlog. Yeah, the backlog is always a problem. Then you can execute the plan ahead approach. Yeah, I think it's if you can preload the thing, like move the stress up front. I see the logic here. If you're gonna be, so here's the thing. I see the logic in what you're saying, my friend. If you're going through the stress anyway, at the end of the sprint, why not go through the stress at the beginning? Get some idea about what it is, the work that you're doing, give an estimate, and then once it's done, you can kind of take it easy because you know that you're going to get that thing done at the end. I don't know, might be a good approach. I've never tried it, but might be a good approach. If it works for you, then for sure. So here's the thing about deciding on a model that works for the user, right? Ilya mentioned about Kanban. Kanban is one of those things. Kanban is a model where you pick as much as you can. You're not committing to what you're going to get done at the end of the sprint, right? You're picking what you can, and if you didn't pick anything, it basically kind of goes to the next sprint. Like anything that you didn't pick kind of falls through. You're not committing to it. The problem with Kanban is that then it's hard to convey what value you're delivering to the stakeholders, because the product manager is going to come to you and says, tell me what I can get done in 2 weeks. What can I release in 2 weeks? If you're doing Kanban, you still need to estimate what can get done, even though you're not taking those things, right? Even though you're not committing to delivering, you're kind of in a way committing. So that's what's going to be a problem. No matter what model you pick, it's you're gonna have to do it. The worst thing of Scrum is it's demanding. Every time it asks us to add, anytime you want to add more, that's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. Don't let anyone catch you taking it. This is what happens. If they catch you taking it easy, they're going to add more. So that's going to be a problem. So you're going to have to manage. You have to manage. SAFe is an agile framework built by IBM, built for enterprise companies. I guess in a way I'm glad that I don't know what that is. Thankfully, I don't know what that is. But yeah, agile framework. That sounds like very agile-y. I saw this post on LinkedIn. Somebody had like, what are the things that you need to do agile? And it had this huge chart with all kinds of buzzwords. Agile framework, all kinds of buzzwords. And I was looking at that thing going, where is the coding in this thing? What block represents the thing where you actually sit down and write code? I spent like, I don't know, a few minutes. I didn't find it and I gave up and moved on. But it was like this huge, that's what agile, when I think agile framework, that's what comes to mind. Yeah, I'm glad I don't know what that is. Ilya, if you're having to deal with that, you have my sympathies. Sprint neglect key supporting activities. Another stressful aspect of sprint in a Scrum-like environment is that they leave you feeling unprepared for the next task. This happens because no time is set aside for proper engineering prep work. There's far more to a task than simply typing out a solution. This is fair. I see a couple more about a meetup. JavaBrains meetup when. The problem with the meetup is it's hard to get to meet in person part. It's really hard to organize things and meet in person. I tried a few times. I don't know. Perhaps this is the closest that we're going to get to a meetup live stream. It's really hard to get a place and meet in person, get people in at the same time in the same place. It's tricky. Where are you working nowadays? I work for LinkedIn. I have been working at LinkedIn for the past 3 years, 4 years. It's been a while. I work for LinkedIn. All right. So yeah, we are not accommodating key supporting activities, which is another thing. You're not accommodating prep work. You have to ideally accommodate that in your estimation. But again, we are bad estimators. We don't accommodate them, and we're gonna have to do that in that spike. Scrum fall, the real and worse picture. Okay, ideally it should be a steady, but then that doesn't happen as well. So what the author is saying is these spikes also go through the crescendo near the release. This is the reality that happens, which is really worse. In this case, you get the worst of both worlds. Stress level starts high and only escalates as the major release approaches. This, I feel, is a problem that can be solved even with Scrum. Because what you should be doing is you should be releasing often as well. There shouldn't be a big release. If you have a lot of sprints for a release, this can be solved. Ideally, you do a sprint here, release here, do another sprint, release here. Because you already have that tension, you already have that stress. At the time, focus on a release and get something out. That's what you should be doing. So this I don't agree with. If you're doing this, if your organization is doing this, this can be fixed. Just release often. You already have that stress. Just push something out to production. Keep pushing out. The problem of waterfall is like this crescendo happens only because we kind of hold on to a lot of changes and release it once. So all of those problems kind of happen at the same time, and it becomes much more harder to deal with. So if you're having this, if you're doing this, why even do this in the first place? You might as well do waterfall, right? So ideally what you should be doing is releasing at these points. So this I don't agree with for this article. This is wrong. This is an opportunity to fix. I was fighting as manager of Bank of America against it, but lost the battle, but not working there anymore. Okay, I'm glad. Hopefully you're not doing safe in your new company. But yeah, so this is an interesting article that I found, which is like, is Scrum stressing you out? It is, it stresses out a lot of people. Thank you, man. Always looking young. You never grow old. Sadly, that's not true. I do grow old, but thank you for the compliment that I'm looking young. It's I look at some of my old videos where I look so different. I'm like, oh man, this is how I used to look. It's one of those things where normally we don't have a lot of videos of ourselves, right? Usually we take pictures, especially, I mean, maybe recently if you're doing a lot of streaming or if you have content creation as a hobby, sure. But 10 years back, it's not common for people to see a huge amount of content of themselves online. This was pre-Facebook and pre-TikTok and Instagram. I have the unfortunate circumstance of seeing my own face of 10 years ago online. And I can say that I looked a little younger back then. I definitely look older now. But I gratefully accept the compliment. Thank you. All right, so that was the article. I'm going to switch to the next one, which is another thing that I found interesting. Why you should design it twice. It's an interesting one that I found as well. Do you feel stress? How do you manage stress while at work? Yes, I do feel stress sometimes, especially when it's like close to a release. It's it's very stressful, and thankfully, we're at a model where we do release often. A lot like for the longest time, I've worked at companies where we do release often, so that kind of accumulation of stress isn't there. It's short amount of stress, but also the thing is, when you do something often enough, the we tend to normalize it. We tend to normalize that stress. So whatever you find stressful, you do it often enough, it doesn't stress you anymore. So I think that's how it kind of handles it. Um, the problem is that there are certain times when the stress is not related to your work. It's about basically the general situation. Like, for example, when COVID happened, there was a lot of stress around, okay, what's going to happen to my job? Do we still have a job? Like when when the upswing happened and then the downswing market went bad, it's like, okay, is what's going to happen to my job again? It's like kind of like the macroeconomic stresses you out, right? So you hear news of layoffs happening everywhere. That can be stressful. What do I do there? I feel the stress just like anybody else. There's no way around it. But on a regular basis, I don't feel that kind of stress at work because it's kind of becomes normalized at any workplace. What you do on a regular basis, like you might feel stress for like even if you enter the most toxic, the most stressful workplace, sure, you'll feel stress for a couple of months, but then after that your body kind of tends to normalize and you're like, yeah, this is what it is. We've been through this 2 months ago. It's going to be the same thing the next 2 months. What can you do, right? So yeah, you just deal with it. Just deal with it. So stress balls, I've never done stress balls. Maybe it helps. I should try it out the next time I feel stressful. You look handsome. Thank you. Thanks for the compliment. I'm speechless. Thank you so much. I've been following you since my career started around 4 years. First time I've joined your live session. Love your work, your smiles. Thank you for the compliment. Thanks for the compliment. Please, I'm gonna try and do more of these live sessions. I love kind of like sharing some things that I found with the community. So please, first of all, please, Kaushik, do more live stream sessions. I'm telling myself because I want to do this and learn with you folks. And please request to you folks to join as well and encourage me. And the more participation I get, the more it's going to motivate me to do more stuff, so we can all learn together as a group. So please do join. The way you explain things, thank you so much. Thanks for the compliment. I try. All right. Moving on. Why you should design it twice. Designing software is tough. I think we can all agree on that. Estimating is tough. Designing is tough. Can we just agree that being a software engineer is tough? Okay, we are doing things which are difficult. Yes, we sit at a place, we don't cut open humans' bodies and fix their problems. Yes, but it is challenging in its own way, right? No matter how much experience you have, your first idea about how to structure a module or system is usually not the best one. I had to learn this lesson the hard way, and I really wish I knew about the design it twice concept earlier in my career. Right, they're talking about a book, The Philosophy of Software Design. The author introduces a simple but powerful idea: design it twice. The core message is that you shouldn't go with the first design that comes to mind. Instead, come up with at least 2 different designs, even if you have to force yourself. No matter how confident you are, you will make better decisions when you compare options side by side. By comparing these different designs, you can find the best approach. Sometimes the final design will combine ideas from both. And the extra effort up front, it's worth it. It's a lot quicker than fixing things later on. It's almost like the chain of thought reasoning that we had back in the open O1 preview models. It's like it's encouraging you to do chain of thought thinking and come up with an idea and then kind of refine it, come up with multiple ideas and refine it. Maybe that's what it is. But I kind of agree with this because when we design things, we don't always know everything we need to know, right? We, as software engineers, we often work with incomplete information. Actually, working with incomplete information is kind of like the status quo. We often do this. Almost always we do this. As we develop and we work on things, we discover things which will affect what decision we should have made and we didn't quite make. And that's where the churn comes. That's where the kind of realignment comes, which is fair. But I wonder if that is going to make any difference when we design it the second time around. If I have incomplete information, I design it once, and with that same incomplete information, I design it again, is it going to be any better? It might help with things that we miss out the first time, but how else would it help? Maybe that's the benefit that they're highlighting here. Let me tell you about the time I got it wrong. I was tasked with designing a new feature for a system. I had it all figured out and spent a whole week preparing. Came up with a high-level design meeting, diagrams, everything, feeling confident. But then a few critical questions came up, questions I hadn't thought about. My whole design fell apart right there. Looking back, if I'd designed it twice, if I'd taken the time to think about alternatives, I would have been much better prepared. Could have answered those questions or even had a backup design ready. It was a big lesson in how easy it is to overlook important details when you rush with the first idea. I feel like it's just about due diligence with design. I don't know. Design it twice idea helps you avoid bad decisions and spot better solutions. Doesn't take a lot of time, improves the quality of your designs and sharpens your skills. I feel like I don't know, maybe it's a good thing to do, but I feel like a part of designing is to think about alternatives. In my mind, thinking of alternative options is a part of my first draft. I design it twice, thrice. Like you have to evaluate alternatives. In my opinion, it's a part of the design. So if you think it's designing again, sure, but refinement, yeah, if that's what you want to call it. But you really have to think about alternatives. You think about plan B, you think about failure conditions, you think about what if my assumptions are wrong. That's all a part of your original design. So if you aren't doing it and you say you're doing it again to do it, well, you're just rephrasing it, I think. There are three reasons why people do it many times over: limited or no design, no proper dev process like CI/CD, no architecture. I think what they're talking about is the architecture part of it. It's not even talking about the implementation. I think they're talking about the design. So you see here, he or she talks about, you know, high level design diagrams and everything. So they're talking about the high level design and they're saying, yeah, when I designed it, I missed a few things. I just had to design it again to think about an alternative. Well, no, in my opinion, when you're coming up with a high level design, you better think about the alternatives. You better think about the not happy path options. That's part of the first design. So you should be doing it. Well, however you slice it, you have to think about the alternatives. If you think it's designing twice, coming up with a second design, sure, but that's something that needs to be done. All right, fair enough. I have a few more articles. I'm going to take a quick break and get a glass of water, and I'll see you folks in a bit. So I have a be right back slide. I will be back in just 5 minutes. Don't go anywhere. The program will resume in 5 minutes. All right, I am back. Thank you for the super chat, Barth. What you've contributed to my career joining this channel. Thank you, appreciate it. I'm glad I could help. All right. Let us go to the next article that I want to share, which is I don't know what the next article is. I have to find out. We're always streaming this late. Always is a bit of a stretch because this is the first time I've streamed in a long time, but I do plan to stream often. I want to have this Tuesday Newsday be a thing, but I want to stream at least once a week. If I do it, it'll probably be at this time because I have work in the morning and weekends are usually a little tricky to deal with. So probably that's the way to go. All right. Let's see. This one doesn't seem to be working. Give me just a second. Let me see if I can fix this. I have an article loaded here, but for some reason it doesn't seem to be working. I might have to just skip it and move on to the next thing. So this was this is an interesting article about Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, muses about the maintainer gray hairs and the next king of Linux. This is there's an interesting thing because Linus is such a popular figure in the Linux world. There has often been this question asked about who's the next Linus, right? Who's next? And we're not talking about the guy who reviews motherboards, right? That's a different Linus. We're talking about Linus, the creator of Linux. He is pretty popular and pretty active in the Linux space. There's a lot of kernel development that happens that he is personally involved in. And he has he's been involved in it for a while. And the obvious question is, at some point of time, he will want to stop being actively involved. He wants to retire and have a good life and spend time vacationing and all that stuff and leave Linux kernel development to somebody else. Might be Linux kernel development might be Linus's idea of a vacation, but basically the idea is like, who does he hand it off to? So this is an article that I found which was really interesting. They made a couple of interesting observations over here. The first is about how much kernel development is still being active. Okay, so for almost 15 years, we've had a very good regular cadence of releases. With releases every 9 weeks, this regularity aims for timeliness and reliability rather than flashy new features. The Linux creator noted that while drivers still make up the bulk of the changes, core kernel development continues to evolve. I'm still surprised that we are doing very core development, Torvalds said, mentioning ongoing work in the virtual file system and memory management. So kernel development is still happening, still being actively worked on by Linus. I just hope that the community has enough knowledge to kind of take over from him whenever he chooses to retire in some sense, because he's been actively working on this even now, and I don't think he has any plans to stop. Rust was a kind of controversial thing. The integration of Rust into the Linux kernel has continued to be a hot topic, even a controversial one. Recently, Vedson Fielho, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name, a Microsoft software engineer and one of the Rust for Linux maintainers, quit the project in a note to the Linux kernel mailing list. Philho left, he wrote, because after almost 4 years, I find myself lacking the energy and enthusiasm I once had to respond to some of the non-technical nonsense. So it's better to leave it up to those who still have it in them. I think the controversy was about a lot of Linux. A lot of people in the Linux community are very familiar and used to C. Okay, a lot of Linux core kernel development happens in C. And Rust is kind of an upcoming language that's taking over that share from C in the Linux kernel development. And basically, it's like, does the Linux community welcome Rust into them and, kind of treat it with the same kind of respect that it gives C, or is it considered like a second class language? What was he talking about? In Linux kernel circles, some developers and maintainers want nothing to do with Rust, and they're not shy about voicing their opinion that the programming language has already failed. Even Torvalds, who doesn't mind arguments, admitted some of the arguments get nasty. I'm not quite sure why Rust has been such a contentious area. It reminds me of when I was young. People were arguing about VI versus Emacs. Oh man! When you were young, people still argue about VI versus Emacs today, right? That's a debate that never ends. For some reason, the whole Rust versus C discussion has taken almost religious overtones in certain areas. I kind of see that, like, you see, when people are used to a language, they don't want to change, right? These are people, especially folks developing C, developing in Linux core, the kernel level. They've been doing C for years and years and years. They're not going to just give up on C and start using Rust, right? It's just the way it is, right? The number of people who don't want to switch, yeah, of course, they don't like. I mean, they're used to it, especially. So, for example, consider this, right? Somebody using TypeScript. At most, they've used TypeScript for what, like 5 years, 6 years, not more than that, right? But consider somebody who's using C. They've used it for 20 years, right? They're kind of married to C. They're committed to it. Of course, they don't want to use Rust, which is like a new up and coming thing. They're attached to it. According to DARPA, the Linux community has no choice but to embrace Rust. Really? Is that what happened? I don't know. If that's the case, then there's going to be more of these arguments. I can see why the argument is happening. They don't want to do Rust because they're committed to C. Torvalds, however, isn't giving up on Rust. He says, Rust is a very different thing, and a lot of people who are used to the C model, they don't like the differences. See, precisely, that's exactly my point. They don't like the differences, but that's okay. In the kernel itself, absolutely nobody understands everything. I don't. I heavily rely on maintainers for various subsystems. I think the same can be true for Rust and C. I think one of our strengths is in the kernel is that we can specialize. Clearly, some people don't like the notion of Rust and having Rust encroach on their area. But we've only been doing Rust for a couple of years, so it's way too early to say Rust is a failure. Which is a fair point, right? It's new. And I think a lot of animosity towards Rust is precisely because of that reason, that it's new. If they had replaced C with C++, there would probably be less pushback than if they kind of bring in an entirely new language in, which kind of makes sense. Some people like to do their manual garbage collection. Yeah, it's the Stockholm syndrome, right? They're used to doing it, so that when somebody says you don't have to do it anymore, it's like, no, we want to do it because we've been doing it for 20 years. So I can understand that. But yeah, VI versus Emacs, people still debate, and it's going to go on forever. So I can imagine, considering the Rust is new and it is gaining popularity, the C versus Rust thing is probably going to happen not just in the Linux space, but in other spaces where C is being used as well, right? Because Rust is kind of an alternative to C in that sense, with the same amount of performance guarantees without all of the pain that people see with C. So wherever C is being actively used, Rust is going to encroach that space. And the people using C would have been doing it for a while. It's going to meet the same kind of pushback. It'll be interesting. Kind of like pushback that people had with mainframes as well, right? New systems came up, people using mainframes didn't want to move. They were attached to the concept. I think with mainframes was that the new thing that came up wasn't really replacing mainframes in that space. It was something entirely new. When that thing system got built, then mainframes were retired. Here what's happening is in the kernel, Rust is kind of encroaching the space. Like in this, it's Rust is playing in the exact same space. So it kind of results in more controversies. Rust may be like pickleball and C is like tennis. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's like, pickleball is like kids tennis, right? I don't think that's quite an appropriate comparison. Rust, I honestly don't know Rust, but I've heard that it's very, very capable, just as capable as C is. So guess two different ways of playing tennis. I don't know. Let's go back to COBOL. Yeah, we should write advanced COBOL microservices. That'll be fun. But the thing is, it's just a language, right? You can easily write a COBOL interpreter that works on a JVM and just use COBOL as a language. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. It's just the runtime is what matters. All right. One of the exciting things that happened this year is a celebration of Real-Time Linux project. What is Real-Time Linux? Let's take a look. Real-Time Linux, a real-time kernel that slips under Linux, installs a set of Linux kernel modules, catches hardware interrupts before they get to the ordinary Linux kernel interrupt handlers, implements its own threads, achieves higher predictability. Interesting. So it's more of like for performance, right? Higher predictability and control over timing. Yeah, for anything that's time sensitive, I guess. This is interesting. I hadn't known about this. Real-time Linux, okay? Which will finally be completed in the kernel after a brief development cycle of about 20 years. RT Linux has been in the oven for that long. Wow. While RT Linux is an infamously special case, Torvalds confirmed that it'll happen in the next release, Linux 6.12. I don't think I have the pull request for the final bits in my mailbox yet, but I'm expecting that to happen this week. I don't know, when was this article released? September 16th. It was just today. Okay, so in a week, we might have real-time Linux. All right, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. Time for a mini Linus. Shifting back to another contentious subject, maintainer burnout and succession planning. This was a succession planning thing that I was talking about. Who is next in Linus? Maintainers are aging. Strangely, some of us, are not quite or as much the right hair color anymore. Torvalds interjected that gray is the right color. Right, I'm just looking at the color of my hair. It might get to gray soon. So the question is, I always ask myself, is it about time to talk about there being a mini Linus? Torvalds turned the question around. True, the Linux maintainers are getting older and people do burn out and go away, but that's kind of normal. What is not normal is that people actually stay around for decades. That's the unusual thing, and I think that's a good sign. At the same time, Torvalds admitted that it can be intimidating for a younger developer to join the Linux kernel team when you see all these people who have been around for decades. But at the same time, we have many new developers. This is the problem, that it's not even new developers. It's somebody bringing in a new technology and feeling intimidated. Rust is being introduced and they're feeling pushback, right? This is a problem when you have a well-established community and a lot of people with a lot of experience. Have you seen those language fights where people argue which language is better, especially when someone picks an obscure language? Oh man, language fights happen all the time. All the time. It's not just language fights. Framework fights happen all the time. Okay? Library fights happen all the time. IDE fights happen all the time. Operating system fights happen all the time. Windows versus Mac versus Linux. Oh my goodness. I've seen fights where it's Windows versus WSL. Same operating system. It's just Windows versus WSL. There are people feel strongly about coding in Windows versus coding in WSL. Fights happen all the time. The problem is that we want to make it attached to our identity, right? You don't say you're a developer, you say you're a Java developer or a JavaScript developer. It becomes a part of your identity. So when somebody threatens it or challenges it, it's almost like they've threatened you or challenged you. So it's that evolutionary biology, that evolutionary part of the brain which goes, oh, this is a threat to me, and you tend to fight it. I think that's what happens. So we end up picking all kinds of small things that we attach to our identity, and we tend to fight it. It happens all the time. How AI impacts Java engineers who love Java like me? Well, you just have to learn to use it as a part of your Java development. Just learn to use the API. Learn to try to solve new problems that weren't formerly possible with Java, like the Code With Me series that I did, right? The Tinder clone. That we did an application that wouldn't have been possible without AI, but we did all that with Java and JavaScript. So that's how it is. We just adopt AI into our Java workflow. And I can tell you love Java because you even have a Java logo for your handle. So yeah, that's cool. Latest news, Java 23 is going to release by today. What do we expect is coming? Wait, Java 23? Is here. It's not today. It's been out for a long time. I can maybe go to another stream, do another stream where I get into this, but Java 23 is not releasing today. I think it's been out for a while. Or has it? Or maybe I'm confusing it with Java 22. Yeah, I don't know. I'll probably cover this in another stream. I didn't have that planned for today. All right? Okay, where was I? Here. To be the king of Linux, the main maintainer, you have to have a lot of experience. And the backup right now is Greg KH. I don't know who Greg KH is. Maintainer of the stable Linux kernel, who's about the same age as we are and has even less hair. If you're looking at hair as a gauge for how long somebody has been in. True, Torvalds responded. But the thing is, Greg hasn't always been Greg. Before Greg, there's been Andrew and Alan. After Greg, there'll be Shannon and Steve. The real issue is you have to have a person or a group of people that the development community can trust. And part of the trust is fundamentally about having been around for long enough that people know how you work. But long enough does not mean to be 30 years. That's fair. Yeah, I see his point. You need someone who you can trust and rely on, but at the same time, you're coming up with a succession plan, so you don't want to have someone who's already old and soon to be retiring, and you want to find another succession plan. It's a tricky problem. It is a tricky problem. And I don't think we have a lot of projects in this industry where you have this problem, like an open source community which is driven by this. Most of the open source communities have like strong company backing, right? Your company takes over and they own it, and then they have a succession plan in terms of an employee. So there isn't one person standing and being a star of the show. I think Linux is an exception, with Linus being that star of the show. So it's not common. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to Linux after Linus says, okay, I'm going to retire and we need someone else to take his place. What I'm trying to say is that I've been doing this for 33 years. I don't want to be morbid, but I think in 33 years, you may no longer be doing this. Torvalds, making motions as though he was using a walker, replied, I would love to still do this conference with you. So while Linux is 33 years old now, Torvalds expects he'll still be maintaining code and making snarky comments for decades to come. Would the Linux community have it any other way? Yeah, I think the Linux community is loves Linus. You know, he sometimes comes across as like a very direct, brash person, but I think over time he's mellowed down a bit. I remember reading about how he would be very, very harsh for newcomers. If you're talking about kind of like having the community be welcoming to newcomers, in the beginning, Linus used to be very opinionated, and he would basically lash out at people who would make bad PRs or bad code changes, right? So I think he has mellowed down, but I think also the community also would like him to stick around. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he does. Rewrite main to Lambda function in the new version. Just kidding. Yeah, maybe he should ask Oracle. I feel like if a company were to take over, it would probably not be in the best interest of Linux. I know you're kidding, but I think it's good that you have like this kind of like an open source person kind of calling the shots here. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I don't think there's a lot of precedence to this, having such a long-term project, do this kind of stuff and have one person be at the helm of it. It's not very common. All right, I want to move to another article that I want to show, just because of how amazingly ridiculous this is. This is from Forbes.com. Okay. There's like article. This is from the future, folks. Forbes, I think it's a reputed website. I thought it was a reputed website at least. How do I make AJAX requests and handle responses using jQuery UI? This is an article, believe it or not, that was published in September 13th, 2024, littered with ads. It talks about making AJAX responses with jQuery UI on September 13th, 2024. Forbes is from the future. That's all I can say. I found it funny. I wanted to share it with you guys. It's crazy. It is crazy. Takes me back to 2007. Yes, for sure. Or perhaps it's a time traveler from the future telling us that maybe in 2037, jQuery UI is going to make a comeback. Who knows? Who knows? All right. Here's another Linux article. Kind of goes with Linux being welcoming, or lack thereof of Linux being welcoming. Linux and open source documentation is a mess. Here is a solution. Simply telling someone to RTFM is not an answer. Read the freaking manual. What is this? Read the fishy manual. Read the fine manual. There have been a few expansions of that thing. I'm on a YouTube live stream, so I'm not going to tell you the actual expansion. RTFM is not an answer when the manual is outdated, unreadable, or non-existent. We need to improve the quality of our documentation, and the way to do that is simple. So here's the thing that I don't understand about Linux documentation, right? When I was in college, when I was learning Unix at the time, the way to learn Unix was through manual pages, right? That was the official documentation for Unix and for Linux as well, right? We have you have a command. You want to learn how to use it. What do? You type man and the command. Fair enough. That worked for Unix. Now we had Linux. We still use man and the command. And we've had so many years of using Linux where these commands have pretty much been the same. Why do we still have to use man? It's the problem with man stands for manual pages, by the way, if you folks don't know. So you need to figure out what a command does, or grep. You need to figure out what grep does. You say man grep. The problem with this is it is command based. It is not task based, right? For example, if you want to learn how to find text in an output or in a bunch of files, there is a mental step where you need to know that grep is a command to use. And then you go to grep and say, okay, how do I use the grep command? And then you can find that out, which is fine. But if you don't know that the command grep exists, how are you even going to do man grep in the first place? You wouldn't know that, right? So the manual pages suffer from a discoverability problem. And the worst part is when you have the same commands and the same kind of like core interface that have sustained for many years, it's not even like you have to put continuous effort to keep it updated. You just create a good documentation for the base kernel commands and you're done, right? You don't have to revisit it again. So the question is, why is the Linux documentation so bad? Why haven't we fixed it? When I was a vet behind the ears Unix user and programmer, the go-to response for any tech question was RTFM, which stands for read the fine manual. Sure, read the fine manual. Read the fabulous manual. Unfortunately, this hasn't changed for Linux in the open source software generations. This is precisely my point. It's high time we address this issue and brought about a positive change. The manuals and all the documentation are often outdated, sometimes nearly impossible to read, and sometimes they don't even exist. I don't think it's outdated. Like, especially for the manual pages, they're very comprehensive and they're very accurate because the commands don't change for years. It's not the problem. The problem is not it's outdated. The problem is also not lack of comprehensiveness. The problem is discoverability. If you don't know that the command exists in the first place, how are you even going to get to the documentation that explains that command? John Corbett, the editor of LWN, the best deep dive Linux publication and overseer of the Linux kernel documentation, has been talking about it for as long as he's been working on Linux, but nobody ever does anything about it. Rather, they do. They moan, they complain, but work on it. It's like the mice belling the cat. Everyone whines about it, but no one works on it. That's not fair. Some people have worked hard on documentation. There's just nowhere near enough of them, and the ones who have been working on it are burning out. So this is a problem. What's the solution? There are plenty of developers who write documentation. Don't get me wrong. Some of them work quite hard at it, but that's usually not what their employers are paying them to do. This is a problem. Linux is funded by companies who pay salaries to employees, right? So it really, the people who are contributing are at the mercy of whatever directive that company has to what they should be doing. And this is the problem. So what's the solution? Let me assure you the better out. Yeah, I think it's a problem with all open source projects in general. Way too many GitHub projects, for instance, have little but a README file for documentation. That's not helpful. Well, some READMEs are actually very, very helpful. Some READMEs go for like pages and pages and pages. They have everything you need right in one markdown file. So what can we do about it? Good list of documentation best practices. Value contributions to documentation as much as code contributions. Put documentation and code in the same project repo. Oh, this has to be done. This just has to be done. In-repo documentation has been the norm for a long time. Make documentation a requirement for merge or release milestones. Have consistent contribution to the process. Consistent contribution process for code and documentation. Have well-documented processes for contributing to documentation. That's great. Good luck getting people to value documentation contributions as much as code. Documentation has always been a neglected child of programming. You want to know the real secret sauce? Ready? Pay the writers. That's it. So basically, the solution is throw money at it, right? Pay for people to write documentation. I don't know if I quite agree with that. I agree that we got to incentivize writing documentation, but I don't think just paying is going to help, because I don't know. Maybe it's going to help for the thing that I mentioned earlier, where, writing documentation for commands that don't change often. But for the part that does, you're going to have to keep paying, right? I think it's better when you have developers value documentation and kind of make it a part of the development, rather than have like technical writers write documentation. They just get paid for it. I don't know about that. What do you folks think? Is this the way to go? Right? Developers don't write documentation at all and you pay others to write it? I don't know. Maybe it might work for one-time things, but I don't think it's going to work as a longer-term solution. I think it would still be improvement in culture would probably be a better option. All right. So that was really all I had for today. A quick roundup of interesting articles and news that I found over last week. I'd love to hear if you've read anything or seen anything interesting. Let me know, and I will read it and I will cover it in the next live stream, whenever that is. Devs don't even want to write comments. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. You need to have a culture behind it. That's really the only way to go. A lot of this is also kind of like, if it's there, it's going to continue. If it's not there, the inertia is going to make it worse, right? It's when somebody is making a pull request on a code base, they're more likely to add comments in documentation if the thing already has comments in documentation in the first place. So I guess in that sense, I kind of understand the argument that this person is making, that, okay, just fix it for now. And that would help kind of bring about that culture. But that fixing is going to help only if there is a conscious attempt to bring about that culture and say, okay, now that everything is there, the documentation is there, let's keep that up by adding documentation whenever you're making a pull request or when you're making a change. But that has to happen. Otherwise, it's really very hard. Create a playlist covering only the features of Java, starting from 8 to 23. We can study these things ourselves, but if you explain, we can know how to apply it in real life use cases. All right, I'll try to work on it. I will definitely try to work on it. Developers don't know how to use MS Word. Well, you don't have to use it. Please don't use Microsoft Word for documentation. You shouldn't be doing that. It should be in repo, right? That's one of the things that was mentioned there, and I completely agree with that. Developer documentation needs to be in Markdown files, and it needs to be checked into the code. This makes sure that whenever the code changes, the associated documentation also changes along with it. So let's say I'm a maintainer of a repo. Somebody makes a change to the code and there is an associated documentation. I'm going to respond in the comment and say, hey, fix the doc so that this thing also gets updated, right? So it's easy to change in one place. The same PR that changes the code can also change the documentation that is affected by that code change, and makes it really, one in one place, which is perfect. So MS Word, you shouldn't be using for anything to do with the code. right? Leave it to the managers. Even managers, I think, honestly, should be using Markdown, but it's a different argument. All right. So I guess that's where I will wrap up today. Thank you, folks, for joining and being a part of this stream with me. I hope you found it entertaining and informative. I will try to make another stream Tuesday, Newsday next week. Happy Tuesday. And manager do pots. What is pots? I don't know what you're referring to. PPTs, yeah, of course. PPTs, Word documents, and Google Docs. Yes, that's the manager's domain. Developers, we should be doing Markdown. All right, thank you, folks, for tuning in. It was nice hanging out with you all. See you for the next Tuesday Newsday next week. Happy Tuesday. Bye-bye.